Danny, welcome back to F.A.C.E.
Can you hear me?
Got your voice, Danny.
Good, good.
You want to, should we use the cameras and scare everybody?
You can.
Okay.
Oh, I'm able to start video.
Yeah, just start. Yeah.
You stopped it. I'm here.
All right. Huh.
It's this. I'll try again. Hold on.
It's okay.
You have to allow me. Well, okay, we can do anyway.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to share. Do you have anything you want to show today, Danny, or we just?
No, I'm just going to talk to you because.
Okay, cool. Then I'm going to come off camera.
All right.
And we'll, I'll just share the screen and show a few things that are happening. And we may as well start with what was your reaction to the BOE raising rates?
I think, well, I literally wrote, this is the dumbest decision I think I've ever seen. I actually wrote that communications of the Bank of England is completely disastrous. And in fact, I think Bailey is in deep trouble. I mean, so what you do is you communicate that you're going to raise rates at the prior meeting and you don't.
Right. Yeah.
And then you allow the market and you completely confuse the markets. Then you come to the next decision when the markets are now convinced you're not going to raise rates, and you do for absolutely no reason whatsoever. It's completely shocked credibility with the exploding Omicron virus, with the government talking about shutting down. Data on retail sales today, people are not going to the shops. Open Table is, collapsing in the UK. The riding of the London Underground was down 20% in the week before they made the decision. So I think this is probably the worst decision I think I've ever seen. I mean, if you think at the very least, their communications are completely shot. Why would you do this? Why would you simply not wait and watch and look and see what happens to Omicron? I mean, they're talking today about a further shutdown coming. Why would you do such a thing? And in fact, to confuse the market, if you're going to do it, at the very least, do it when the markets were expecting it. I mean, one of the big things that I always
do you think that the Fed's double taper gave them, a little bit of cover to go ahead and do it?
Well, possibly so, but that wasn't exactly a surprise, Dale. I mean, I think what perhaps we should focus on is, as a central banker, you'd normally, the big thing that I always used to think about was, is this a surprise? So the question sometimes, I mean, the issue used to be with us, would we release a statement? And normally we'd release a statement if we made a change, or we'd release it if it was a surprise. So the question here is, why the surprise? You're possibly right that they thought, oh, well, the Fed's done a double take, but the Fed is still doing QE. They actually haven't finished doing QE. And the question is, the question I guess we should ask ourselves, if they did a surprise, the conclusion must be, well, it ought to be, and I'm sure it isn't, it ought to be that they know something that we don't know. What's the possibility that that's true? And the answer is almost zero. What's the chance that they know something about Omicron or the state of the banks or something that means they have to raise rates? I just think it's an enormous error. And
so that's so basically we have Omicron and we have a tightening virus that is filtering through to every central bank in the world right now.
Right.
What is their motivation? And I remember when we first started talking, you said, Powell, has it right. Yellen, he's with Yellen. Janet has been pretty quiet about the double taper and possibly higher yields. And, has this changed your opinion of Powell?
Well, I think the thing that really gets me more than anything is that you hear particularly bank presidents and many commentators behaving as if they know what's coming, as if they have an adequate forecasting model, which they don't, which they have some historical data they can put into that model, which they don't. And the right thing to do is to look and wait and watch and see. So If you're engaged in a taper, well, that's fine. We can taper things down, see how things are going. The labor market appears to be recovering. There's obviously an issue of inflation. But the question is, well, what's coming down the road? And the answer is, I don't know. I mean, I just saw this morning that Quebec has actually said this morning that essentially that's going to close down. You just had the retail sales numbers this morning. But Quebec is closing down. How do they know what's coming? How do they have the faintest idea what's coming? So I hear bank presidents all the time saying, oh, yeah, well, we should be in a position where we raise rates in June or September. How do they know? The best thing to say is, we don't know. We don't know anything. This is looking at the website, all the stuff that I've been doing about. Yeah, it's a lot to do with the well-being of nations. You know, I've been thinking a lot about Adam Smith and about what's the purpose, in a sense, of economics. And the purpose of economics is to raise the well-being of nations. And it's not to go in and make stupid pronouncements. The right thing to do is to sit and wait and watch, see how this virus develops. And if it develops in a way that's, bad, then you'll hunker back. And if the thing goes away, then it's time to raise rates. But I think the biggest issue now is anybody who has the faintest clue and says, we've moved our forecast back from September to August. Based on what? So I think what we're observing is guessonomics. I think.
Well, inflation has become a political issue.
Absolutely right.
Okay, so don't you think there was a chance that there was a question of whether or not Powell would be renominated or it would be Brainerd?
Yes, I think so.
So don't you think that it's possible that President Biden and Powell told him, he gave him the green light to be an inflation fighter because that's what the people want? Because
no, I mean, I think the chance that Brainerd was going to get the job was probably slim, because I think she would have had a lot of problems getting through the Senate. I think Powell was no problem. I mean, I think listeners need to kind of, the analogy, Dale, that I like is, think of, I'm sitting here in my house on an island in Florida, and hurricanes hit, right? Oh, this is my new one. Hurricanes hit. So what happens? The hurricane hits, prices rise, the price of roofers and everything else rises.
Yeah. Right.
Takes about 6 months for those prices to readjust. The question in a year's time is what's going to happen? And the answer is, as long as there's not another hurricane, prices go back to normal. So that's what's true of the US economy. These big hikes are there now. The question is, will they be repeated next year? And I think Powell and Yellen are right. They've perhaps gone on longer than we would have thought. But my expectation is that, as is many forecasters, that these big numbers will drop out. And by the end of 2022, we'll be back to 2. That's kind of what I have in my head.
Okay, so there's a possibility that central banks across the globe are making a policy, or, well, I mean, it is, you mentioned it, COVID's still happening. The economy, last time you and I talked, you came up with a number that California was in the same position they were before 2008. Are your numbers still showing slowing down of people's happiness and spending and economic weakness?
Right. Let's talk about that, Dale. So the big thing that I've been doing, you showed some of the pictures on my webpage. A great deal of the work I've been doing is about well-being. So if you look at those papers, so there's a whole series of papers about the pulse of nations. Can you predict downturns? Can you predict unemployment? What's causing the recession? So the answer is, in that work, and I've got a column, you see, recession is the threat, not inflation. So what we do in that work is we try and think about what people say and how they feel. And that seems to be crucial. If people think the stock market is going to fall, the stock market will fall. If people think the economy is going to slow and they stop going to shops and they stop spending, then the economy will slow. The big deal in the data, which people have to understand, is that the data that predicts all 6 of the last 6 recessions, which is basically consumer expectations, particularly from the Conference Board and from the University of Michigan, those now are at the positions that they were in 2007, predicting recession. And those data predict 6 of the last 6 recessions. Now, obviously, there are other things going on which don't predict it. So normally you'd see collapsing employment and rising unemployment, and you don't see that. So obviously the question is, what does this show you? But I think the answer is all these people who keep saying the Fed should be tightening and so on, these data are completely contrary to that. Michigan survey fell again.
Right.
So these data point to carefulness and slowing. And I think the other thing, which when I listened, I mean, particularly the bank presidents, who I think are just off the planet. I mean, essentially what you've got to understand is the virus is spreading. And the question is, what about long-run changes in behavior? Are we just going to be back to normal? And are the bottlenecks going to be helped by a central bank tightening? How does a central bank tightening help ships come into into Los Angeles, into the docks? So I think the answer is, what we should be doing probably is keep the stimulus going, wait and watch, don't prognosticate, don't say we know what's coming, say here's a series of scenarios that's coming. And I think the great risks, again, are to the downside, that the central bank will make an error. And since from 2015 to 18, I opposed every rate rise the Fed did. That was clearly an error. And now the Fed admits that it was a mistake. So look at the Bank of England's decision. I think the only question at the Bank of England is when they will have an emergency meeting to reverse that rate rise. I think that's likely.
Maybe by spring.
Well, I think it might even come within the next month as they shut down further. I think any day now the government's going to shut down and go down into lockdown. And I think that the likelihood is that rate rise will have to be reversed. And the question is whether the governor of the Bank of England can survive.
How about Paul, even though he was renominated?
Well, Powell has taken a rather more sanguine approach and obviously been scared a bit by the inflation perhaps being slightly higher than expected.
Yeah, he had to eat crow by saying
he had to eat a bit of crow.
Sticking with transitory, right?
Right, but the issue is it's still potentially possible and plausible that inflation is transitory. I mean, I remember. Can I remind you? I remember in July 2008, inflation was rising and the same arguments were going on. And what people hadn't understood, and we're talking about $200 a barrel oil and the fact that the inflation was going to rise forever, realizing that nobody had actually spotted, well, few of us had, but in August 2008, inflation had spiked. And the US had gone into recession in December 07, and the whole of the rest of the world went in April. And the focus was on inflation when it was clear that was the wrong focus. Looking back, inflation was, obviously inflation hurts people, but there's a lot more work done showing you that. Let's just say, so people get it, that a 1 percentage point rise in inflation hurts people, but a 1 percentage point rise in unemployment hurts people at least 5 times more. So if you want to deal with inflation, which hurts people, by imposing something that hurts people much more, then you need to take that into consideration. And politically, that's going to be a big deal. I mean, and the issue is the man or woman on the main street is going to be impacted by rate rises, whereas the banks may like it, markets may like it, but the issue is, what do the voters think?
Okay. Well, this may create a scenario next year. Should we break down in crude and trade down here back at $50 or something like that, would take a lot of the inflation pressure off.
Well, I mean, I do still think, I've been saying this, and I think I said to you last time, but I've been saying it a lot, that obviously there's an issue with inflation in the sense that, yes, there are these bottlenecks, and yes, the price of goods have risen, but most consumers have an option that they don't have with the unemployment rate, because the unemployed are hurt by being unemployed, and rising unemployment rate scares everybody else. If the price of goods rises, here's a set of options that you have. The first option is you decide not to buy stuff. The second option is that you opt away from the things whose prices have risen. So if the price of beef rises, you go buy pork, or you buy chicken, or you buy seafood, right? So obviously there's a way of that the price of them will come down as demand for things falls. So inflation tends to, you can, many of these goods you can avoid. Obviously milk and bread and oil and so on that are not terribly substitutable. But in principle, think of the price of timber. People can actually choose to not buy stuff. They just choose to spend less. I'm not going to buy a new set of windows for my house. I'm not going to buy a new second-hand car because the prices have gone up 25%. I'm going to stick with the old clunker. As soon as that happens, what's going to happen to prices? Prices are going to fall. So I think people don't really get that if prices rise, say from 100 to 106 from year 0 to year 1, and they remain at 106 for the next 3 years, prices are 6% higher than they were at the beginning, but inflation is 0. So I think the expectation is that Powell has moved away from the word transitory, but everything suggests to me that that's what we're going to see, that within 12 months, these big numbers are going to drop out and be replaced by smaller numbers. If not, why not? Tell me why the hurricane is going to come again.
Okay. You know, I want to switch gears a
Sure.
little bit, and maybe you could help me with the mystery of how the US went from massive unemployment and spent trillions to support those people, how we went from having massive unemployment to a labor shortage.
Well, I'm a labor economist, Dale.
Yeah.
Right. The way to think of this is that there are bottlenecks here. A good starting point, when you say a labor shortage, well, let's try a set of numbers which will actually get people going. The first thing is, well, how do we define a labor shortage? Well, the question is, are we really at full employment? Beveridge defined full employment to be some number, probably with an unemployment rate of around 2%. And he defines full employment to be where workers are continuously getting new job offers, and the unemployed are getting job offers that they can go to. So the question is, are we really in a period of labor shortage? Well, in some senses we are, partly because people don't want to be teachers. They don't want to go work in a place where they might get the virus. So a crucial thing to have in your head is actually what's happened to the employment to population rate. And that's a really big deal, because and I'm just going to pull up the numbers while we're talking. Let me just find the numbers and we can share the screen. Hold on. So basically the issue, let me find the numbers. I think that would be a pretty good thing for me to do. Let me find these numbers for Dale, and I'll share my screen. And I think this is really the number that people really need to look at. So let me show you this.
Okay,
If you let me share my screen in a second.
Go ahead.
Let me just give you this number. Let's go to 2000. I'll go to 1999. Go. Okay. Can I share this screen, Dale?
Yes, it's a green box.
Okay, let me go. So here's the screen that I want people to see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So here's the. You say this is a labor shortage. Okay. So let's look here. This is a very simple measure, and the reason we want this measure is the unemployment rate is a mess. So the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed over employment plus unemployment. But the problem is that people can go to another labor market status. It's called out of the labor force. So that's a problem. So this is a very nice, simple measure that I like to use. It's just what proportion of the adult population is employed. So 60 people out of 100 are employed. This is called EPOP. That's 60 over 100. So here's your question. How is this anything like labor shortage? So here we go. So this is 59.2, which is the number we've had today, and it jumped. It jumped in the last month. So people go, oh, it's a labor. Well, okay, let's go to 2020 January. It was 61.1. So we're now down 32 full percentage points. EPOP is down 2 percentage points. So what's happened is that people are not being reflected in U. They've gone to O. They've gone out of the labor force. But let's look back. Let's look back to the start of the Great Recession. So here we are in 2007, December, the number was 62.7. But let's go back. Let's go to 2000. So we were at 64.6. What's crucial here, Dale, is that if you look at a country like the United Kingdom, in many respects similar, unemployment similar, system similar, same financial services sectors and so on. In the UK, EPOP in 2021 November is about the same as it was in 2000. It's about the same as it was in 2000. So the reality is that the US, and we don't, for anybody who says there's a labor shortage, they have to tell me where the 9 million workers have gone. So if you had a 64.6% EPOP today, that's about another 9 million people who'd be working. So how is that full employment? So I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
So the question is, how is that full employment? We're down many, many millions compared to other countries. So the question is, what's preventing people getting back to work? The answer is fear of the virus is the big deal. Lack of demand in the economy, the relative attractiveness of workers and work is a really big deal. So for anybody who says we're anywhere close to full employment, you want to look at those numbers. And I've done lots of work showing that, in fact, prior to 2008, the unemployment rate impacted wages. Since 2008, the unemployment rate's a hopeless measure of what's going on in the labor market. So the first thing is you shouldn't focus on the unemployment rate. You should focus on, well, this is a pretty darn good number. So this says labor demand is well below what it was. The Fed is nowhere near maximizing employment. So I would have said, if you ask me, what should the Fed's mandate be? Well, let's get the EPOP back to where it was in 2000. That's 9 million more people in work. That doesn't suggest you should tighten. If you tighten, what are you going to do? You take the taper off, you raise rates, that number, that presumably is going to go down below 59 to numbers that we've never seen before. And the question is, what are those people doing? And the answer is, well, they take jobs. Think about if job offers came. So they get offered $10 an hour, $20 an hour, $30. Would they come to work? And the answer is that they would. So I think this is a misunderstanding of the nature of the labor market. People are not in the right places to where the jobs are. People don't want to do the jobs at the going prices. They can't afford childcare. You take off this child tax credit, people will just stop going to work because they can't afford to do it. So this is about a labor market in trouble with sets of bottlenecks and people just being scared of going to work. But anybody
PTSD, people after a few years of this, and there've been so many, and I noticed that you talk about psychiatry, social psychiatry. I mean, there's never been more of a need for social psychiatry with the emotional roller coaster we've all been on for 2 years.
Dale, so we've been looking at, so in the US, we have this problem we call deaths of despair. Now that's about nearly 100,000 people a year dying from drug overdoses, which pales against the numbers that have died from COVID. But the evidence is, well, a few bits of evidence, particularly since the onset of COVID, what we've seen is that it disproportionately has fallen amongst the young. So 20 to 29-year-olds are the ones who've had COVID the most. But their mental well-being has really deteriorated a lot. So in the United States, so that's a really big deal since 2020. And if we look at mental health in America and distress and inability to kind of do the things that your father did, that's a major set of social questions. So distress in America, and I've used the word distress in several things that I've written about, distress in America has risen dramatically. And I think I've shown you this before. The proportion of people who say every day of their life is a bad mental health day has doubled over the last decade or so. So I think that this is an issue. And if people keep saying people just should go back to work, everything's absolutely fine. Well, it's not absolutely fine. And if you, in a sense, if you were anywhere close to labor shortage, if you were anywhere close to full employment, people would feel a lot better than they do. We would not be seeing collapsing consumer confidence. We would not see these levels of poor mental health. So I think it's about central bankers who don't walk them. They walk the streets of New York and London and Chicago and San Francisco. They don't walk.
They need to go to Des Moines, Iowa.
Des Moines, Iowa, exactly. So I think there's this, in a sense, the position that I take is that the person walking. I call it in England. I call it I've talked about the man or woman on the Mile End Road omnibus. The Mile End Road there is an interesting place. It's the road out of London. It dates from about 1100. But why it's called the Mile End Road is it's a mile from Aldgate. So it's a mile from the City of London. So there's the City of London and what happens in the City of London. And then a mile away, there's this road that people have walked on for 1,000 years. And the answer is there appears to be a growing disconnect. And that's what we've seen around the world. And the idea that you're now going to tighten in a world where EPOP is at 59, not at 65, seems a major issue. And that's sort of what Powell and Yellen have talked about. Yellen especially, because Yellen's a labor economist like me, and she's aware of these things. And Janet and I think in many ways have been extremely close. I know her and I've spoken to her many times, but I think she and I express a similar view, which you can't discount. You cannot discount this view that the labor market is in trouble and that many of these things will be transitory. And if you were to raise rates, it will potentially be.
What may not be transitory is the results of years of psychological distress.
Well, that's right, Dale.
I mean, even on a personal level, if you go to take an interest in trying to get better, whatever
Right.
the issue is.
Yes.
There's a time period of work and healing. And,
Absolutely right.
it's not going to happen overnight for everyone to just say, hey, everything's okay again.
Well, I think that's right, and there's a great literature. People can read the book by Angus Deaton and Anne Case, where they talk about deaths of despair. So there's not only despair, Dale, but we've seen this enormous rise in drug overdoses, but also in suicide, also in cirrhosis of the liver. So we're seeing morbidity and mortality being impacted. And in a sense, what I hear in people in the markets is they sort of think that that's irrelevant. We care about interest rates and we care about the rate, but what about real people who are struggling through this thing with every expectation that Omicron is going to be worse? We're looking, as I said this morning, Quebec shuts down, the Netherlands shuts down, the UK is likely to.
They're talking about 1 million cases a day here in the US.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so in a sense, this is not simple, but how does a central bank tightening help you? I mean, okay, I understand that inflation is rising, but all the research that I've seen and participated in suggests that tightening, so it's not that people say, doesn't inflation hurt you? Well, sure it does. But the question is, what's the alternative? And all the alternatives look worse. So I think, say again, 1 percentage point rise in inflation compared to a 1 percentage point rise in joblessness. Well, in various measures, but the answer is between 5 and 10 times worse. So it's not like, oh, we solve inflation and then everything's great. You do what the central bankers and the commentators all say you should do, and that makes it worse. Well, someone's just actually said, not tapering causes asset bubbles.
Yeah.
Well, then if it's an asset bubble, let's think about that. Good comment. The question is, as a central banker, what is your job to burst asset bubbles? Well, the first thing is that an asset bubble, for people who are people inside an asset bubble don't think it's a bubble because they wouldn't be in it. The second thing is, can a central bank deflate that bubble, simply
without collateral,
without the collateral damage? And in a sense, if you're in an asset bubble and the bubble bursts, well, that's your fault. It shouldn't have been in the bubble in the first place. Not sure as a policymaker.
Well, everything's a bubble.
It's not my fault.
We're in the everything bubble now, Dale.
Yeah. Well, we're in the everything bubble. You're right, Dale. But in a sense, what can central bankers do? Clearly, what QE did, and I voted precisely to do this. We vote for QE to basically, raise asset prices, allow people to take more risk, and try and put the economy back. You can't cut interest rates more, but that's had side effects. And I think the reality is that all of this stuff lies at the door of the fiscal authorities. For example, there's nothing the central bank really can do after it's done QE that it can do to help inequality. But that's the job of the fiscal authorities. If they choose not to, that's up to them, right? And so essentially the world of the central bank has created these bubbles because it's the only things it's got are asset purchases and interest rate changes. The fiscal authorities have just backed off and said, let the central bank do it. And then there are consequences. But the fact that there are asset bubbles, I mean, to be harsh, well, then you made a bad decision, you're going to lose. Tough.
You know what, Danny? A great conversation and a great message in the season we're in. And maybe now that people could put some numbers to the distress their neighbor or their community might be in.
Right.
How about, here's my prescription, and it's not about tightening. It's not about QE. How about having a glut of kindness?
Absolutely.
All right. And it was kind of you to just come in here, Danny, during the holiday season and share with us. I hear the passion in your voice. And
can I say something quick? If you go back to, I've gone back to read Alan Smith. If you go back to read Wealth of Nations, the book before it was actually about the theory of moral sentiment. And I would encourage people to go and read the first 2 paragraphs, which is almost exactly what Dale said. Smith talks about kindness and compassion of other people being a central part of the human condition. And that he wrote before the Wealth of Nations. So Dale, the theory of moral sentiment is almost exactly what you just said. Go back and read it. It's about caring about the well-being of others. and that improvement.
He also wrote about that debt is enslavement. Either do it with the military or debt. Maybe we need to be thinking about a jubilee. It happened throughout history. Maybe instead of trying to inflate our way out, we come up with a plan and just forgive people's debt.
A plan, Dale, is better than Guessonomics.
Yes. Danny, Merry Christmas, my friend.
You too, buddy.
Happy New Year. Yeah, we'll get back together after New Year's.
Yes, sir.
All right, Danny Blanchflower, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. I learned from Danny every time I talk to him. That's a wrap for us here. It's also the first day of winter. Let's have a great winter despite the weather outside. And you know what I mean by weather, the virus storm that we're in. And you could join the crew in 13 minutes for the Morning Edge. Thank you, everybody. Adios. Thank you, Danny Blanchflower.
Hey traders, this is Blake Morrow with ForexAnalytix. Thanks for stopping by our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like these videos, share them, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the content that we provide here for free. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next video.